The fluorescent lights of Mel's diner cast their harsh glow across the worn linoleum floor as Sarah Martinez wiped down table 7 for the third time that evening. Her shoulders ached from the double shift, and the coffee stains on her uniform told the story of another grueling day serving customers who barely acknowledged her existence. At 32, Sarah had learned to find dignity in honest work, even when that work meant cleaning up after people who saw her as invisible. The diner buzzed with its usual evening crowd, truckers grabbing a quick bite, teenagers sharing fries and gossip, and business travelers killing time before their flights. Sarah moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones more deeply each day. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd built for herself and her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. 3 years ago, Sarah's world had crumbled when her husband left without warning, taking their savings and leaving behind only divorce papers and a note that said he needed to find himself. The mortgage payments, Emma's school supplies, the medical bills from her mother's recent surgery, it all fell on Sarah's shoulders. Waitressing at Mel's wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed her to maintain some semblance of stability for Emma. The bell above the door chimed, and Sarah glanced up from refilling the coffee station. A man in worn jeans and a simple black t-shirt entered, his dark hair slightly tousled and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like any other traveler passing through, perhaps heading to or from LAX. What struck Sarah wasn't his appearance, it was his presence. There was something calm about him, a quietness that seemed to create a small bubble of peace in the chaotic diner. He chose a corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that most customers avoided. Sarah grabbed a menu and a glass of water, making her way over with the practiced grace of someone who'd been doing this job for years. "Good evening," she said, setting down the water with a smile. "I'm Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up, and Sarah was struck by his eyes. Kind, attentive, with none of the impatience or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to from most customers. "Coffee would be great, thank you," he said, his voice soft but clear. "And thank you for the warm welcome. It's been a long day." As Sarah poured his coffee, she noticed the genuine way he thanked her, making eye contact and seeming to actually see her as a person rather than just a server. It was such a small thing, but in her line of work, kindness stood out like a beacon. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu, or would you like a few more minutes?" she asked. "I think I'll go with the meatloaf and mashed potatoes," he said, closing the menu. "Comfort food sounds perfect right now." Sarah jotted down his order, but before she could leave, he spoke again. "You seem like you've been on your feet for a while. Long shift?" The question caught her off guard. Most customers didn't engage in personal conversation, and when they did, it was usually to complain about something. "It has been long," she admitted, "but I can't complain. Bills don't pay themselves, right?" Something in his expression shifted, a flicker of understanding that made Sarah feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in months. "No, they certainly don't," he agreed quietly. "You work hard. That's admirable." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "Just doing what needs to be done," she said, but his words had touched something in her that had been dormant for too long, her sense of self-worth. As she walked away to place his order, Sarah found herself stealing glances at the quiet stranger. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from the usual parade of customers. He wasn't checking his phone obsessively or making demands. Instead, he sat quietly, occasionally looking out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. The diner's dinner rush began in earnest, and Sarah found herself pulled in multiple directions. A table of college students complained loudly about their fries being cold, a businessman snapped his fingers to get her attention, and a family with 3 young children left a disaster zone of spilled juice and scattered crackers in their wake. Through it all, the man in the corner booth remained patient, never once trying to flag her down or showing any signs of irritation, despite the growing chaos around him. When Sarah finally had a moment to check on him, she found his plate clean and his coffee cup empty. "How was everything?" she asked, reaching for his plate. Perfect, he said, and something in his tone made her believe he wasn't just talking about the food. You've been working nonstop since I got here. Do you get a break at all? Sarah paused, surprised by his concern. I take a few minutes here and there, she said. Comes with the territory. Everyone deserves rest, he said simply. Even the people who take care of others. There was something profound in his words, a recognition of her humanity that made Sarah's throat tighten unexpectedly. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as more than just a function, more than just someone whose job it was to serve others. Can I get you anything else? She asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Just the check, please. And Sarah? She looked up at the sound of her name. Whatever you're working toward, whatever you're sacrificing for, it's going to be worth it. I can tell you're someone who gives everything for the people you love. Sarah stared at him, wondering how this stranger could see so clearly into her life, into her struggles and motivations. How do you, she began, but he was already reaching for his wallet. Lucky guess, he said with a gentle smile. But some things are written in how a person carries themselves. You carry yourself like someone who's been through battles but hasn't given up fighting. While Sarah processed his words, trying to understand how this customer had managed to see past her uniform and tired smile to the person beneath, he left cash on the table, more than enough to cover his meal and a generous tip that would help with Emma's upcoming school field trip. Thank you, Sarah said, but when she looked up, he was already standing to leave. Thank you, he replied, for the excellent service and for reminding me why kindness matters. As he walked toward the door, Sarah noticed him stop to help an elderly woman who had dropped her purse, bending down to collect her scattered belongings with the same quiet patience he'd shown throughout his meal. He opened the door for a young mother struggling with a stroller, offering a warm smile that seemed to brighten her entire evening. It wasn't until he was gone that Sarah realized he'd left something behind, a folded piece of paper tucked under his coffee cup. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the note, written in neat handwriting. Sarah, your kindness tonight was a gift I didn't know I needed. In a world that often feels harsh and disconnected, you reminded me that genuine human warmth still exists. I can see that you're fighting battles that others might not understand, working hard not just for yourself, but for someone you love deeply. Please accept this small token of appreciation for your service, your strength, and your beautiful spirit. Use it for something that brings you joy or makes your life a little easier. You deserve both. The way you treat strangers with dignity and care, even when you're exhausted, tells me everything I need to know about your character. Your daughter is lucky to have someone so devoted, and the world is better because you're in it. Keep shining your light. P.S. Sometimes angels work in diners, serving more than just food. They serve hope. Beneath the note was a check that made Sarah's knees buckle, $5,000. Enough to catch up on rent, to buy Emma the winter coat she'd been needing, to maybe even take a day off without worrying about lost wages. But it was more than the money that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It was the recognition, the validation that her sacrifices mattered, that her kindness had been seen and valued. In a world where she often felt invisible, this stranger had not only noticed her, but had taken the time to acknowledge her humanity in the most profound way. Sarah sank into the empty booth, clutching the note and check with shaking hands. The initials at the bottom, KR, seemed familiar, but in her emotional state, she couldn't quite place them. It didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had seen her, really seen her, and had chosen to respond to her kindness with such overwhelming generosity. Sarah, you okay, honey? Dolores, the night manager, approached with concern written across her weathered face. I think, Sarah said, wiping tears from her cheeks, I just met an angel. As the evening wore on and Sarah continued her shift, she found herself replaying every moment of the interaction. The quiet stranger hadn't just left her money, he'd left her hope. Hope that kindness still mattered in the world, that her efforts to maintain dignity and warmth despite her struggles weren't going unnoticed, and that sometimes when you least expect it, the universe sends exactly what you need. Later that night, As Sarah unlocked the door to her small apartment, she found Emma curled up on the couch with a book, having finished her homework hours ago. The sight of her daughter, safe and content, filled Sarah with the familiar mixture of love and determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of the past 3 years. "How was work, Mom?" Emma asked, looking up with eyes that held the same warmth Sarah had inherited from her own mother. "Different," Sarah said, sitting down beside her daughter and pulling her close. "Really different." As she told Emma about the kind stranger, carefully omitting the details about the money until she could process it herself, Sarah realized that the evening had changed something fundamental in her perspective. For months, she'd been focused solely on survival, on making it through each day and providing for Emma's basic needs. But this stranger's note had reminded her that she was more than just a survivor. She was a person worthy of kindness, recognition, and even unexpected blessings. The next morning, Sarah woke up before her alarm, something that hadn't happened in months. Instead of the usual dread that accompanied the start of each workday, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: anticipation. Not because work itself had changed, but because her understanding of her place in the world had shifted. As she prepared Emma's breakfast and got ready for another shift at Mel's, Sarah kept the stranger's note folded carefully in her pocket. Every time doubt crept in, every time a difficult customer tested her patience, she'd touch the paper and remember that her kindness mattered, that her sacrifices were seen, and that she was deserving of the same care and respect she showed others. The check remained folded inside the note, a tangible reminder of an intangible truth. Sometimes the universe conspires to reward goodness, even when that goodness is offered without expectation of return. But more than the financial relief it provided, the money represented something Sarah had been missing: the knowledge that she wasn't alone in her struggles, that somewhere in the world there were people who understood the value of kindness and were willing to honor it in extraordinary ways. Emma noticed the change in her mother immediately. "You seem different today, Mom," she said as Sarah braided her hair before school. "Happier." "I am happier," Sarah realized, surprising herself with the truth of the statement. "Sometimes, sweetheart, when you think nobody notices the good things you do, the universe sends you a reminder that everything matters. Every kindness, every effort, every sacrifice we make for love, it all matters." As Emma headed off to school and Sarah prepared for her shift at Mel's, she carried with her more than just the memory of one generous customer. She carried a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of her own worth, and the knowledge that even in the midst of struggle, grace could appear in the most unexpected forms. The diner looked the same as always when Sarah arrived for her shift: worn booths, fluorescent lights, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease. But everything felt different because she felt different. The note in her pocket had reminded her that she wasn't just surviving. She was living a life of meaning, one kind interaction at a time. As the morning rush began and Sarah moved between tables with her usual efficiency, she found herself truly seeing her customers for the first time in months. The tired businessman wasn't just another demanding client. He was someone starting his day, perhaps dealing with his own struggles and pressures. The elderly woman ordering her usual coffee wasn't just a predictable regular. She was someone who might be lonely, who might look forward to these small interactions as the highlight of her day. With each smile, each genuine good morning, each moment of patience with a difficult order, Sarah felt the truth of the stranger's words more deeply. She was serving more than food. She was serving hope, comfort, and human connection to people who needed it just as much as she had needed his kindness the night before. During her break, Sarah finally allowed herself to really look at the check again. $5,000. It was more money than she'd seen at one time since her divorce, enough to create breathing room in her finances that she'd almost forgotten was possible. But beyond the practical implications, the amount represented something profound: a recognition that her value as a human being far exceeded what society might assume about a diner waitress struggling to make ends meet. That evening, as Sarah sat with Emma at their small kitchen table helping with homework, she made a decision. A portion of the money would go toward immediate needs, catching up on bills, buying Emma the things she'd been needing, creating a small emergency fund. But she also wanted to honor the spirit in which the gift had been given. "Emma," she said, closing her daughter's math book after they'd finished the last problem, "how would you feel about doing something special for someone who needs help?" Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What kind of something special?" "Well," Sarah said, thinking carefully about how to explain, "someone did something incredibly kind for me yesterday, and I think the best way to say thank you is to pass that kindness along to someone else who needs it." Together, they brainstormed ways to help others, donating to the food bank where they'd occasionally received assistance during their hardest months, sponsoring another child's school field trip, or simply looking for opportunities to help neighbors and strangers who might be struggling with their own invisible battles. As the weeks passed, Sarah found that the stranger's gift had created ripples far beyond the immediate financial relief. Emma, inspired by her mother's experience, began looking for ways to show kindness to her classmates, especially those who seemed lonely or left out. Sarah's co-workers at Mel's noticed the change in her demeanor, and her renewed warmth and patience began to influence the entire atmosphere of the diner. One evening, as Sarah was training a new waitress who seemed overwhelmed by the pace and demands of the job, she found herself passing along the wisdom she'd received from her mysterious customer. "Remember," Sarah told the young woman as they cleaned up after a particularly challenging shift, "everyone who walks through that door is fighting battles we know nothing about. Sometimes the kindness we show them might be the only good thing that happens in their day. It matters more than you think." The new waitress, barely out of high school and working to pay for community college, looked at Sarah with gratitude. "How do you stay so positive? Some of these customers are really difficult." Sarah touched the note in her pocket. She'd kept it there every day since receiving it, a talisman of hope and reminder of her worth. "Someone once reminded me that how we treat others defines who we are, not how they treat us. When we choose kindness, especially when it's hard, we're choosing to be the best version of ourselves." Months later, Sarah would learn the true identity of her generous customer when Emma, flipping through a magazine at the dentist's office, suddenly exclaimed, "Mom, that's the man you told me about, the nice one from the diner." Sarah looked at the magazine cover featuring Keanu Reeves promoting his latest film, and the pieces finally clicked into place. The quiet humility, the genuine kindness, the way he'd seemed so comfortable in his own skin despite sitting in a worn diner booth. It all made sense now. But somehow, knowing his identity didn't change the impact of his gift. If anything, it reinforced the lesson he'd inadvertently taught her. True character isn't about status or recognition. It's about how we treat each other when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain, when kindness is simply the right thing to do. That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, "Mom, do you think we'll ever see that nice man again?" Sarah considered the question, thinking about the randomness of that evening, the unlikelihood of their paths crossing again in a city as vast as Los Angeles. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "But in a way, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we remember what his kindness taught us, and we try to pass it along to others." "Like paying it forward?" Emma asked, her young mind grasping the concept with the clarity that children often possess. "Exactly like paying it forward," Sarah confirmed, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes the most important gifts we receive aren't things we can hold in our hands. Sometimes they're reminders of who we can be." As Sarah turned off Emma's bedroom light and headed to her own room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The struggles weren't over. There would still be difficult days, demanding customers, and financial challenges to navigate. But something fundamental had changed in how she approached these challenges. The note from the kind stranger had done more than provide financial relief. It had restored her sense of dignity and purpose. In recognizing her worth, he'd helped her remember her own strength. In acknowledging her kindness, he'd encouraged her to continue choosing compassion even when it was difficult. Sarah fell asleep that night with the note still in her pocket, where it had remained every day since that transformative evening. But more importantly, she fell asleep with its message written on her heart, a reminder that everyone matters, that kindness creates ripples we may never see, and that sometimes, when we least expect it, angels appear in the most ordinary places, serving hope along with their gentle words. The fluorescent lights of Mel's diner would continue to cast their harsh glow, and Sarah would continue to move between the worn tables with practiced grace. But now she carried something precious with her, the knowledge that her work had meaning beyond mere survival, that her kindness was a gift to the world, and that she was worthy of the same care and respect she so freely gave to others. In the end, the stranger's note had given Sarah something more valuable than money. It had given her back herself.